2026 is upon us, and with it comes an absolute truckload of great-looking games that I'm very interested in. 2025 had a great lineup of games in my opinion, and 2026 has the potential to be even better, and that's just with the games we know about right now. This is the strongest selection of upcoming games I've gone over in these videos so far. I had over 30 games in the running, so narrowing this list down to just 10 was pretty hard. I had the top 9 solidified fairly early on, but there were about 6 or 7 games fighting for the number 10 spot. That's how competitive this lineup was. I know that putting out this video at the end of February means it's too late for a few games, but Mario Tennis Fever was never going to be in the top 10 anyway. I know, what a shame, but what are you gonna do? I have a confession to make. I've never played a Tomb Raider game. I know most of the older games are on modern platforms now, but I was always turned off by how people describe the controls, so I just never bothered. The most exposure I've had to Tomb Raider was watching the first Angelina Jolie movie and the Netflix animated series, which I thought was okay. I remember seeing Lara fighting a T-Rex and thinking, is this normal for the series? But that doesn't mean Tomb Raider has been on my mind recently, and when Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis was announced at the Game Awards last year, it piqued my interest. It's a remake of the first Tomb Raider, which I can understand being redundant for some since the first game was already remade in 2007, but since Tomb Raider is getting back into the spotlight, I think it's nice to serve as an introduction to the series for people like me who have never played them before. Graphically, this remake looks wonderful, with a very colorful jungle setting, and Lara herself looks as gorgeous as ever. The devs have said they're aiming to make Legacy of Atlantis a full reimagining, preserving what made the original so beloved while making the experience feel more modern, and apparently add in new surprises. So this seems to be more on the Resident Evil 2 and 4 side of the remake spectrum, which is great. We're actually getting a brand new Tomb Raider game next year, so I think Legacy of Atlantis is going to do a very good job tiding fans over until then. If one of the new surprises is letting Lara punch a shark in the eye like she does in the Netflix series, then you've already sold 5 million copies. I don't make the rules, that's just how it works. If Alan Wake 2 has taught me anything, it's that the directors at Remedy are both geniuses and completely insane. I haven't played any of their other games yet, but if they're half as bonkers as Alan Wake 2 is, then they've made some real winners. One game I've heard really good things about was Control, a shooter where you make creative use of psychokinetic abilities, and it's getting a sequel later this year, Control Resonant. Interestingly, Resonant is shaking up the gameplay quite a bit from its predecessor, instead going for an action RPG style, with melee combat including this giant hammer, though supernatural abilities have been carried over. Visually, the game looks very trippy, which at this point I've come to expect from Remedy, and the use of red does a very good job making everything look that much more intense. I really like how the gravity shifting looks. It reminds me of the Doom Zone from Shadow Generations, and combat looks pretty satisfying too. After playing Alan Wake 2, I am absolutely terrified of what Madness Resonant's story could bring, because there is no way a game that looks like this and made by this studio doesn't have an absolutely unhinged plot, and I'm all here for it. Control Resonant might not end up being one of the best games of the year, but it'll likely be one of the most memorable. All they have to do is let the old gods of Asgard make another awesome musical sequence, and it'll stay in our memories forever. The lead up to indie game releases tend to go one of two ways. Either the game is announced and is released immediately or shortly after, which is why they hardly ever show up on these most anticipated games lists, or the game disappears for long periods of time between trailers and then just shows up, like Hollow Knight Silksong. Mina the Hollower definitely falls into the latter category. This is Yacht Club Games' first game that isn't Shovel Knight related, and it's a top-down adventure game in the style of 2D Zelda, particularly the old handheld ones like Link's Awakening and the Oracle games. But instead of a sword, Mina uses a whip like a Belmont from Castlevania, and an assortment of items like you'd expect. I really dig this specific pixel art design. Not many games use the Game Boy Color aesthetic, so it already stands apart from most just on the art style alone. I haven't tried the demo, but impressions online have been very positive, so I'm hopeful Mina the Hollower will be just as great as Shovel Knight. There is a little bit of concern given that it was announced in 2022, got a release date for Halloween 2025, and then got a very last minute delay for sometime this spring, but if Cuphead and Silksong are anything to go by, Mina's chances for being great are still pretty high. If Yacht Club has delayed again to make it the best it can be, I'm completely okay with that. It'll most likely be worth the wait. It's been a while since we've had a new James Bond game. The last one we got was 007 Legends in 2012, which sucked so bad that it basically killed off Bond games for the next 14 years. But with the movies in limbo for the time being, IO Interactive has taken it upon themselves to give us Bond's next big adventure. These guys are the ones behind the Hitman series, so yeah, they seem to be a perfect fit. Right off the bat, 007 First Light stands out because it's starring a young Bond before he gets his license to kill. We've had other versions of Bond's earlier missions, but in those he was already a qualified agent, so it's pretty neat to see a younger version of him, and Patrick Gibson's performance is already pretty swell from what we've seen so far. Gameplay-wise, 007 First Light is pretty similar to Hitman, being a third-person action game with open-ended missions and a lot of sneaking around, but as a James Bond game, takes advantage of all of his iconic gadgets. All the classic Bond hallmarks are here, from characters like M, Q, and Miss Moneypenny, to the cool cars and ensuing vehicle chases, to the diabolical villains and over-the-top action set pieces. This doesn't feel like Hitman with a James Bond coat of paint. This really feels like a James Bond game, which is great. Bond games have been living in the shadow of GoldenEye on the N64 for a long time now, so hopefully this one will stand tall among the rest in its own right. The sooner we can forget 007 Legends happened, the better. This is the third year in a row I've made these most anticipated games videos, and the previous two each had a fighting game on them, and here's another. We have 3 big licensed fighting games coming out this year. Invincible Versus, which looks really cool but is held back a bit by my lack of knowledge of Invincible. Avatar Legends, the fighting game, saved from cancellation and looking pretty neat with characters I do care about. And the most interesting of the bunch, in my opinion, Marvel Tokon Fighting Souls, which translates to Marvel Fighting Souls Fighting Souls. This is a tag team fighter in the style of Dragon Ball Fighters, even made by the same studio, Arc System Works, but instead of being 3v3, it's 4v4, which already makes it stand out among the other fighting games. The game looks incredibly stylish with its bright colors and over-the-top anime look, which was actually Marvel's idea, and all the characters look great in this style. The base roster is certainly smaller than I'd like. 20 characters in a 4v4 fighter means repeats will happen a lot, but the roster itself is very interesting so far. From classics like Captain America, Wolverine, and Doctor Doom, to newer characters like Ms. Marvel, Magic, and a newer Ghost Rider, to whatever the heck Danger's supposed to be. But what's really interesting is that they're all divided into 5 teams of 4, in case you want a team of just X-Men, for example. The gameplay looks sharp and flashy as you'd expect from Arc System Works. Though impressions from the 2 betas have been mixed, I'm hopeful the devs can clean everything up for its release in August. It's been way too long since the last Marvel fighting game, and even longer since the last good one, so let's see if Tokon can live up to the hype. If this, Avatar Legends, and Invincible Versus all meet or surpass expectations, this will be a great year for fighting games. And this isn't even the Marvel game that I'm most excited for this year. Resident Evil has never been in as good a place as it is now. Ever since Resident Evil 7, the franchise has put out almost nothing but bangers, with only the RE3 remake being a slight hiccup. We're getting the next mainline game, Resident Evil Requiem, in just a couple days, and though I'm not a hardcore fan of the series or anything, it's doing just about everything I want from a new entry. Requiem is split into 2 perspectives, which isn't new for Resident Evil, but I really like how they're doing it. With Grace, you have the pure survival horror style, where you're practically helpless against these monsters, while Leon has the more action horror style, more closely resembling Resident Evil 4. I really like this. It not only makes sense for both characters, with Grace being the rookie and Leon being the experienced professional, but it also puts both acclaimed styles from the newest games and remakes together, so people who prefer one over the other can have both in one game. You can even switch between third and first person for both characters, which is really cool. The story is following up from the Resident Evil Outbreak games, as Grace is the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft from those games, which is wild since the mainline games hardly ever acknowledge the spin-offs. Now, the game has sadly leaked online before release, but I've managed to avoid all spoilers so far, so I'm excited to see how this goes down. Just keep Leon's goofy one-liners and we're all good. Before 2019, I barely gave Fire Emblem any attention. I tried the Blazing Blade and Awakening, but neither of them held my attention and I dropped them pretty quickly. But then I bought Fire Emblem Three Houses, expecting to have a similar experience. 400 hours later, I think it's safe to say that I like Fire Emblem now. So the announcement of Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave made me a lot more excited than it would have a decade ago. We only have one trailer to go off of so far, so gameplay-wise, it kinda just looks like more Fire Emblem, but it's everything else that has me intrigued. Graphically, this is a big step up from Three Houses and Engage, with cool looking character designs that don't fall into the VTuber-esque trap Engage's characters did, though Diedrich here is blatantly just Alucard from Castlevania. I also like the Greco-Roman aesthetic they're going for. It's not something Fire Emblem's really tried before, aside from the various Colosseums. Cool stuff, but what's really got me excited? Turns out this game is actually set in Fodlan, the same world as Three Houses, as you can tell from the Heroes Relics, Divine Beasts, Return of Gambits, and of course, Sothis. I have no idea if this is a sequel or a prequel or whatever. Three Houses, multiple roots mean a true sequel is impossible, so I'm very curious to see how this fits into the Fodlan timeline. Whatever the case, Fortune's Weave is easily the biggest and most appealing Switch 2 game of the year so far, so I hope this turns out as awesome as Three Houses, or even better. Can't wait for another 7 years of discourse. It'll be so much fun. If you told me at the beginning of the decade that Konami would have a big redemption arc in the 2020s, I would have laughed right in your face. 10 years ago, Konami was viewed as the literal devil for many, many reasons, and their game output around that time plummeted in both quantity and quality. But over the last few years, they've been working to rebuild their reputation, with lots of great collections, excellent remakes of Silent Hill 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3, and even a great new Silent Hill last year that I sadly haven't played yet. But even with all that, the announcement of a brand new Castlevania, Belmont's Curse, still caught me completely off guard. After 18 years, Castlevania has returned to the beloved Metroidvania style, and it looks awesome. It's being co-developed by the Dead Cells devs, and we already know how much they love Castlevania thanks to their special Dead Cells collab, so I imagine getting to work on the series must be a dream come true for them. The art style looks stunning, visually taking a lot of cues from the awesome Netflix animated series. Using the Vampire Killer whip looks more satisfying than ever, and the bosses look awesome and challenging as expected. What's really interesting is that our playable Belmont this time is Trevor Belmont's daughter, most likely with Sypha because, well, just look at her, making this a direct sequel to Dracula's Curse, hence the title. Metroidvanias have had a resurgence in the last decade, so it's only right that the namesake of the genre's second half gets a return to form that looks this glorious. What a wonderful night to have a curse. Last year, I watched all the X-Men films for the first time, and though the quality of said films were all over the place, I enjoyed myself thoroughly. Since the X-Men are back in the spotlight thanks to X-Men 97, Marvel Rivals, and Tokon, as well as the movie characters returning for Avengers Doomsday, I picked a pretty good time to become a fan. And if all that wasn't enough, Insomniac's Wolverine game they announced 5 years ago has finally resurfaced and is coming out this year. We all know Insomniac knows how to make a great superhero game thanks to their excellent Spider-Man games, so my confidence for Wolverine is pretty high. Something I can immediately appreciate is just how visceral combat looks to be. I've been watching the 90s X-Men cartoon, and seeing Wolverine not actually use his claws against his enemies is really funny, but does him a disservice. Not here. Wolverine is just as brutal as I hoped he would be, slicing and impaling enemies like it's nothing, while not shying away from how bloody his manner of killing gets. Kinda like how Logan handled its fight scenes. While Spider-Man is very acrobatic and has a lot more range, Wolverine is purely a short-range berserker, and the game seems to be taking full advantage of that. This is actually set in the same universe as the Spider-Man games, which is pretty neat. So far, the only other characters we've seen are Mystique, Omega Red, and a Sentinel, but I'm excited to see who else could show up. I'm very glad Insomniac decided to make this game very different from their Spider-Man titles, and I can't wait to get my hands on it this fall. If you give us a full battle between Wolverine and Sabretooth, you'll already have the movies beat on that. I can tell you that for sure. Yeah, you all saw this one coming. Grand Theft Auto 6 was number 1 on last year's most anticipated games list, and here it is again! In hindsight, I should have foreseen GTA 6 getting delayed to 2026 since, you know, we've barely seen anything from the game. We did get another trailer last year, plus a bunch of screenshots, and yup, it still looks amazing. Everything I said last time still stands. The graphics are stunning, Lucia and Jason being a Bonnie and Clyde style duo was a really interesting idea, there's a trillion things to do in Vice City and the state of not Florida, and it's weird, weird, weird. Honestly, what else is there to say? This is not only the most hyped game of the year, but potentially the most hyped video game of all time thanks to GTA 5's mind-blowing success. The only way GTA 6 would not be number 1 is if Half-Life 3 actually got announced for this year, and we all know that's not happening. If I have to talk about this game again this time next year, then I don't know, I'll feed my PS5 to an alligator or something. And that's it. Those are the games I'm most looking forward to this year. This was pretty tough since there were several games that almost made the list, like Saros, Phantom Blade Zero, that new Star Wars racing game, the Avatar and Invincible fighting games. They all look so good, and this is without factoring in the games that have yet to be announced for this year, which we'll probably see in the next Nintendo Direct or something. 2026 is going to be wild. Let's hope it's the good kind of wild. Bye.